that impatience, coupled with the challenges, the needs, and the aspirations of the young people that I was involved with. But what have we achieved? Because in a target-driven society as we are now, it's all about the bottom line, whether in the private sector or the public sector. Targets, benchmarks, models, exemplars. What is the bottom line? Well, if we've proven a track record in social inclusion and regeneration, that's what we've done. We've demonstrated the role that sport and the arts can play in culturally delivering and making a difference. We've pioneered. We've actually tried to raise the bar, faster, higher, stronger, pushing the line, pushing the boundaries, hopefully for all the right reasons. We've developed and hopefully created better citizens, whether they be sporting or otherwise. Whatever they are, they should realise their potential. Dr. Mick Hines has now informed me that we've helped inspire a multi-million, even billion-pound industry. But I argue, should it be an industry? Should that not be a massive reinvestment into the real people and the real communities to ensure we can sustain them? We've developed products, packages and services, and I've had to learn a corporate speak in order to deliver a social need, because it is the business of social delivery. Policy Action 10 was the government's look at social exclusion, the role that sport and the arts could play. Our 5-year report, the Youth Charter and its role as a tool of social regeneration, helped pull that together. And we've established public-private sector multi-agency working, locally, nationally and internationally. By now there was a Commonwealth Games. Manchester had seen that by losing, you could win. They had a further line they wished to draw, a far higher aspiration that this city should and could deliver a major games. We became the youth culture strategy. Who do we target? All aspects of society. Pre-16, post-16 was the speak. But in schools, on the streets, in young offenders institutions, and at all levels of society, top, middle and bottom, prevention, intervention, rehabilitation, and back round again if need be. The challenges are still evident. The Moss Side phenomenon is a national one, as I said earlier. But the challenges are simple. There needs to be a greater recognition of sport and the arts as a vehicle of social inclusion and regeneration. I do not believe that is anywhere near the case yet. We're tinkering around the edges and we're losing the vaccine effect of what these two powerful mediums can achieve. There needs to be a more improved and coordinated public-private sector policy and investment, not donation, but investment at all levels of the social inclusion and regeneration agenda. And there's a greater need of sustainability. This is the single most important factor. For the community, by the community, with the community. For without it, everything we're doing is a waste of time and resource. When I looked and started to research more about the North-South, we took 50 young kids, meet 50 young kids in '93, and they had a charter and they just played at Rec Man at Wembley over 3 days. I know David's arrived, so welcome David. But we just brought everybody together under one roof. And you brought some sports people. But at the moment, we've now got agencies who have to fill that gap because they need to provide the net. There's an interesting prop here. And Smart Justice are one of those unique charities that we try and work in collaboration and partnership with, because it is about a multicultural and multi-social consortia approach. Lucy Russell heads up Smart Justice. I've only met her over one meeting, but we connected and we felt there was some common ground. She felt that I was threatening to those that I wished to try and convince. I've now been told it's improved to challenging and engaging, so maybe that's my achievement. But I'd like Lucy to come up now and simply give her perspective, because I think it's one of the more interesting when we talk about the North-South divide. Lucy.
I'm going to start up here, but then I'm going to come down and show you what this is all about. Thank you very much, Jeff. Smart Justice is a national campaign. We're based at the Prison Reform Trust in London. And what we do is we promote community-based solutions to crime. And our campaign is aimed at the general public. And I think, one of the reasons that we're here is because everything that's being said is fantastic. But what we've got to do is get it out there. We've got to get those messages out there, not just onto the street, but to government, into the media, into the tabloids, onto radio phone-ins and daytime TV. The general public as a whole has got to know what is going on and what is actually working. Just very briefly on the campaign, What we believe is that in terms of prisons, we've got to have prisons because there are some people that do need to be in prison. But for a lot of people, prison is a place where it's basically a revolving door, which is what I'll explain to you in a minute. And that for most short sentence prisoners, prison just doesn't work. It's a university of crime. It's an occupational hazard for a lot of people. It's also highly expensive, and it doesn't work. All it does is just satisfy the public's need for punishment, but actually it's not an effective tool in actually reducing crime. So what we believe and what we try and tell the world is that it's important to tackle the causes of crime, invest in crime diversion schemes, and effective alternatives to custody. And that's again why we're here today, because what the Youth Charter is doing is incredibly important in that. And the Youth Charter is actually part of our alliance of supporters. And as I said, it's very important to get the messages that are here today out onto the street. And what we believe is that visual images actually work much better than the loads and loads of reports that we all read day in, day out and don't take much notice of. And that's why we brought along our revolving door today. I'll have to talk loud, but I've got a loud voice, so you probably hear me. You can't, it should have been positioned slightly more like this, but this side's a shop, this side's a prison cell. What we do is we use actors who play the part of offenders, go in the shop, nick things, go around the door, sit in the prison cell doing absolutely nothing, not changing, go back round the door, back into the shop to commit more crime. And so what we're trying to do is explain to the public that this doesn't work in stopping this. Locking somebody up in a short sentence doesn't stop them shoplifting. And I think the thing that I want to say, and we very much believe, is that where do shoplifters actually come from? Often shoplifters are people who have been or are addicted to drugs. And where do these people come from? And I think what's interesting in this is that what we're talking about here is social engineering, and the social engineering of the most deprived is as fine-tuned as the social engineering of the people at the top of the tree. So what we mean is that, if you're born into a family where it's difficult for them to parent, if you go to a crap school, if you are excluded from school, if you don't get training, if you don't get employment, if you end up addicted to substances, you are going to end up, you're very likely to end up committing crime, and therefore prevention is absolutely key. It's much more sensible, it's actually much more cheap in the long run. And that's why we're here, because what the Youth Charter is doing is preventing crime, and prevention really is the key. And I think it's doing a fantastic job, and we very much support what it's doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Alliances are vital, campaigns are vital, because it is still a subject that people either turn away from, switch off with their remote, or arguably only become exposed to by the experiences of their friends or family members. Before we look at the issues, though, just to look a bit of where we are now in the Youth Charter journey, because that's been very much the past. We're getting to the present now. We're getting to what it's all about. And Ty, if you can put that second bit of footage, I think it'll give you a feel and flavour as to what it does actually represent. Inspired the Moss Side Millennium Powerhouse. It was Manchester's business community and public sector's response to their needs, their aspirations and their dreams. It is everything that we had seen in Los Angeles at the Amateur Athletic Foundation. But I do wonder sometimes if it's just the building that we're good at, and it's not the software of people, the management skills, the appropriation of what is needed to engage, motivate and inspire the abilities and talents that these young people have to take responsibility and ownership for the management and operation of them. The operation and management of them was learned from South Africa. In 1993, coincidentally with the launch of the Charter, the new South Africa was realising its freedom. And I was fortunate enough to go to South Africa and see how communities who had lived in an unacceptable culture of apartheid, were doing incredible things socially with nothing. So I took this rather naive view that if we had so much over here, it couldn't be hard trying to socially broker that benefit to everybody. The powerhouse was built. It was realised. It was taken back and made to happen. What I then realised was that we could possibly make something happen that might well take us to the next step. And I found very quickly you had to take a brave move. You had to step back. And you had to take a step back with a big idea. Sorry, that's not supposed to be there. Previous, go. Help. Yeah, possibly. Possibly. And I don't want to end. I want to go to previous. Don't worry, my IT skills have improved. Volunteerism does great things, especially when you use your IT support. Lucy talked about the cost to society and the issues. And I learned that the Moss Side Million Powerhouse was simply highlighting the issues. I thought it would start to address the issues. But it highlighted what you do when you try and join things up. When young people are brought in on the fringe, but not at the very core of the decision process. When they're not made to actually exercise their rights and thereby take responsibility for their actions. These are just some figures. In the background, it's sort of all the things like the lack of respect, the poor health, gun use, insurance premiums, bullying. A young person reflecting in research and saying this was the worst country in Europe to grow up in. I can't believe that. But if they believe it, that's something we need to take notice of. The costs. London Underground, 60 million a year. In educational, arson, non-attainment, billions. We worked out a cost of around £3 to £4 billion just in the disruptive area of antisocial activity. And that's where we felt we could possibly yield some of that money to help save some of the spend of that money. Because it is about reinvesting and re-intervening where possible. Oh. Okay. There. But in joining it all up, as I've said, it's where people say to me, why are you joining it all up? Because unless we join it up in business terms, can we be corporate, where we take marketing from investment to human resources to special projects to working out what our bottom line is and what the profitable return should be. And if young people are that investment, as consumers, customers, future employees, and the people that might actually carry on the ongoing development of these investments, how do we pull something together that actually provides a win-win-win? Young people, the wider community, and those who invest in them. The Commonwealth Games provided that by way of us taking another bold step. We invited 10 communities at the gift of the private sector, the Guardian Media Group, to invite 1,000 young people, 100 from each of the 10 communities. These were the communities who would never have got near the Games. And we embarked on a very ambitious 3-day programme. I call it the Alternative Games, the other great event in Manchester. And some people were here today as volunteers. Jean was here, she used to be my secretary. I burned her out and then re-engaged her and pressed gang with her husband on my hand. And that was the most rewarding aspect, I think, of the last decade. Seeing people come from all over the place. Local policemen organised the traffic. We contacted local communities and we said, we've got 100 tickets for the Games, but we can't get you here. They called back in an hour and says, we've got transport. Now I challenge any of you to broker that quickly. They did it. Then we had to go through risk assessments, insurance, all the things I hadn't talked about. But they've all turned around in a very quick period of time. 400 people each day. They met the president of the Commonwealth Games Federation, Duke of Wessex, and his wife. There were 2 young men from Thorncross Young Offenders Institutions whose lives were changed that day. They were the only 2 who wrote me a thank you letter, by the way. So don't give up on them when we lock them away. They've made an error, not a mistake. But they all came back to me and they said, what are we going to do now? Because they're now inspired. What do we do? How do we do it? How can we take that Moss Side experience? And some of them had seen the Powerhouse. We want one of them in our community. And I thought, well, that's a bit ambitious. Let's start small and grow. And I think ultimately, what it is and has been about for me was how we could pull it together. And since the Commonwealth Games, I've visited those 10 communities. I've tried to get a feel for where they're at. I've gone back to Hackney, where I grew up. The East End corridor is at the very heart of the regeneration strategy of the 2012 Olympic bid. But that community has the same problems that Moss Side had 10 years ago, frighteningly so. So how could we continue to make that impact and to break the mould? Citizenship in Action has 3 main components. We realise we need to crystallise our efforts. We could not be all things to all people. So we developed something for school, something for the community, and a project that was achievable, believable, and could be realised in a short period of time. Because young people do not trust us, ladies and gentlemen. Am I right or am I wrong? They don't trust you. By the way, the youth lobby. So we've got to re-establish confidence. So I revisited what we did in Moss Side. And it was a unique French approach that an English competitor who liked going down slopes at speed, who I happened to meet at a reception, said, I've got a good idea. And I thought, that'll do, because at that time Moss Side was a war zone and I needed some intervention. And Citizenship in Action is what you see here, 3 main components. Soccer-wise, using the national game in a unique citizenship-based learning experience that keeps the interest of those who aren't interested, who gaze in the window, who told will not pursue any sort of target of learning, and looks at rights and responsibilities within the citizenship curriculum, education, health, social order and the environment, but more importantly, carry that on into an out-of-school activity, continues the link, continues the cultural interaction and engagement. The Rugby Wise Toolkit has been something born out of a relationship with the Rugby Football Union for the last decade. Why? Because, as the late Sir Peter Yarrington, the former chair of Sport England, or the then GB Sports Council, and a former rugby international, bless him, said, get on and do it, but I don't know how you're going to fare. Well, I went to the RFU, and in rugby there's a code. There's a way of doing things. But they're still seen as suits, white men in suits, I've heard, who are disconnected and removed from reality. You'll see an Agora space, and we'll talk about that more later. But as part of that, I suppose, testimony as to what can be done, what have rugby done? Because there is social development through sport, and there is sports development in the community. Rugby now do both. I'm going to ask Robert Horner, the immediate president of Rugby Football Union, to actually share some views with you, some reflections, and to give you a feel as to what's required. Robert.
To be part of this wonderful, invigorating occasion. I come from Kent, the Garden of England, commonly regarded, I think, as an agricultural, possibly a commuter area. And yet in rugby terms, we stretch from London Bridge to the English Channel, and we have within our bounds the London Borough of Southwark, one of the more deprived areas of Greater London, with the London boroughs of Greenwich and Lewisham adjoining, and they're equally full of problems. In 1991, it was my responsibility in Kent to set up a youth development scheme, and we appointed the first youth development officer. 5 years later, we had 3 youth development officers. And then in 1997, when things were going, we thought, quite well in Kent, I think I stunned them at a meeting by saying, there's no rugby played in the London Borough of Southwark. I want you to go and introduce it. And when they picked themselves up off the floor, one of them went and knocked on the door of a primary school some 300 yards from London Bridge. He was greeted with open arms. It was the first governing body of sport that had taken any interest. And 6 months later, in Burgess Park, which is the only piece of green grass in Southwark which doesn't have any laid-out sports fields, we had a New Image Festival involving 24 schools. The mayor came to pay a token 10-minute visit at 3 o'clock. A quarter of an hour later, he rang his PA at the town hall and asked that the deputy mayor should assume his responsibilities for the afternoon. And he stayed until 6 and presented the certificates to every competitor at the end. And so rugby had got a boost in Southwark. We've developed it, and a couple of years later, through the Kent County Union, we have formed the Southwark Tigers Club, a youth club, which plays rugby regularly and habitually is winning competitions both regionally and nationally. And then, some 2 or 3 weeks before the Commonwealth Games opened in this city, I came up to a seminar on social inclusion. I was interested because of my specific experiences in Southwark, but to get here in time for the opening at 10:30 meant that I had to catch the 6:55 a.m. train out of Euston. And if you live in Mid-Kent, that means a very early start. And during the day, I was absolutely enthused by what I heard, particularly Jeff Thompson's presentation. And I had a chat with Jeff later. And when I had arrived, I think I had envisaged I'd spend the return journey sleeping off the early start. Instead, my mind was full of all I'd heard and what hopefully we could do. And so when I knew that I was to become the president of the Rugby Union for the year commencing July 2003, I made the resolve that social inclusion and helping to advance the work of the Youth Charter would be my principal aim and objective. We did a certain amount of groundwork during the preceding year, and each of the 45 rugby development officers in the union were charged with starting within their area at least one social inclusion project. In the event, by the time I stood down this July, we had over 60 social inclusion projects up and running. They involved a whole range of activities. Up here in Lancashire, we've had a Dads and Lads project. This is an educational project utilising a resource which encourages fathers to become involved in their sons' learning through the medium of rugby. We've had a link with the Greater Manchester Police and our RFU Tug Rugby programme in areas of high crime, trying to get the youngsters involved in a worthwhile sporting activity. And they enjoy the rugby because not only is it a skillful sport and involves physical fitness, it also, in a controlled environment, involves a degree of physical contact, limited aggression, controlled aggression, and this is part of the growing process which a lot of them appreciate. We formed partnerships in some part of the country with Network Rail and the British Transport Police, and this is aimed to, in areas where there's a lot of trespass on railways and vandalism and potential damage to trains done, getting the kids off the lines into some worthwhile physical sporting activity. The list is endless, but I am very encouraged with what I think we have achieved. Over the last year, the Union has developed what it calls its impact strategy to grow the community game across the country. And social inclusion is a very large plank in that strategy. The Union has bought into it, and I hope that we shall, through the game that I have had the pleasure of leading, be able to develop social and human development to life through a game which the youngsters, although they may not immediately think of it as a game for them, if you actually take it from and involve them, then they will become enthused. And it is, I think, a happy coincidence that I should be speaking here 2 days before a New England team plays its first international under Jason Robinson as captain. Jason came from a deprived area of Leeds. He will tell you that in his early teens he was a hoodlum tearaway. Somebody introduced him, in fact, to rugby league, and he then changed. And he is now going to be the leader of his country when they play their first autumn international at Twickenham on Saturday. And by a happy coincidence, the Southwark Tigers Club, which we were responsible in getting going, which is now being copied by the Lambeth Bulls and teams in East London and Islington. The Southwark Tigers will be taking part in the pre-match activities on the pitch. So, from the game of rugby union, I wish this youth charter every success, and I hope that together we should be able to cooperate in the future to advance the cause for young people and bring them into a worthwhile life. Thank you.
Jason Robinson will admit, as he has when I've been in the community with him, he still pinches himself to try and work out how he can have gone from one code to another, whilst that was considered a non-happening, to starring and helping make rugby history and helping England win the World Cup. For that, sweet Shannon's tour, to then travel the country, to go to Bradford and Manningham, areas it may not have well reached or touched, and to now lead his country on Saturday. But for me, the Southwark Tigers to be there, when we all know that Daniel Taylor, through tragedy, inspired what was happening there, gives me a bit of a go. But I always sometimes wonder when it needs to be tragedy of our young that sees something have to happen. But citizenship in action, what is it? As I've said, 3 elements: school, community, and I would like to pay tribute to the Rugby Football Union. They are the only governing body in this country who are joining it up, who are committing resource, with energy, with code, and making it happen. And with Robert Horner, I know Steve Barr is in the Energy and Ethics Officer for the Rugby Football Union. The Rugby Wise Toolkit is here, updated, as part of that progression and learning. And I know that if Butt is here from the Rugby Codes, and they're all working in collaboration. And if the 2 Rugby Codes can, anybody can. And Black is there at the back, ever watchful, ensuring what I get up to. Citizenship in Action developed, as I said, as a youth culture benefit of the 2002 Games. We want to develop citizenship-based learning in 50 schools and 10 communities. The Soccer-Wise citizenship curriculum, in partnership with UNICEF and Manchester United, has been developed. Manchester United like to share their ideas and are now making that available to football. And hoping that the national game will be able to follow what rugby has been able to do. We want to train 1,000 social coaches, people who do real things in a different way, people who don't fit in the box, people who work below the radar, and some of you are here today, do not have the conventional qualifications. Games is here today, the Open College Network, accrediting something so people can feel they can use it to help their progression. Community sports leaders, positive futures, lots of things, but still not reaching the people who need it to engage, motivate and inspire the young who need to be captivated. We want to transform and create 10 community spaces for age range 5 to 85. And I'll tell you why. I was fortunate enough to take what I was sharing with you as the project that we first inspired in Moss Side and see it at work in Switzerland. And people have Switzerland as this wonderfully removed society with nothing going on. And I was taken around by the people who currently develop the Aurora space, and it was simply a meeting place. That is its meaning, its translation. And I saw something that I didn't think I would see, but I aspired to try and see in the communities in which I contribute to here. And that was a situation where I saw some punk rockers, with had earrings everywhere, makeup all over the place, just sitting there and having a chat. There were some 5-year-olds with their teddy bear at the side of the Aurora space,